Good evening, friends. When the darkness fills our crowded headspace, dulling the pain, blinding the eyes, blocking the throat, what do? We make comics. Let Stephen Amon show you how.
Hey everybody, welcome to Let's Make Comics. Today I'm going to do a nice simple video here. I'm just going to go through some of the old comic books that inspired me. And I'm going to have Chandra do the same for comics that inspired her. So, not necessarily doing the greatest comic books ever made list. These are kind of personal things that shaped kind of my image of comic books and how I created them myself. It was hard to limit these to just 5. I had a good list of about 20 that I whittled down here. So the first one I would talk about is the comic that actually got me into comic books, which was The New Warriors. This was illustrated by Mark Bagley, done in the early 90s. It was a team of like teenage characters. For some reason, Night Thrasher was the one that really kind of captured my imagination, and I would do a lot of fan art of Night Thrasher. My brother was always the comic book reader. He's a few years older than me, and he always had his collection of comics and the Hulk and Daredevil, and I would take a look at them from time to time. I was always interested in drawing, and comic books kind of became something that like, oh, when I'm drawing, I could draw these cool superhero characters.
So the first one I have is Marvel's Gargoyles. Yes, Gargoyles as in the animated series, but this is not to be mistaken with the SLG title of the same name. This was a title that was in 1995 and had luscious, beautiful artwork from Amanda Connor. Now, the story was very adult. It had lots of adult themes to it and kind of strayed away from the actual series. It did make reference to some of the events that happened in season 1 of Gargoyles. But other than that, it was so adult. It was so weird. And I loved every second of it. And I was like, wow, look at this. And I started doing like weird, dark, more adult comics. I was probably 13, 14 at the time, and I was just like, whoa, this art is so unique and so different. And of course I was in and out of the comic book world, but this was a big one because it dealt with one of my favorite cartoon shows, and it was adult and weird, and of course I was getting into anime and things like that at the time, and it just kind of coalesced with that. Not only was it adult, but it had very strong female leads in it. Elisa Maza and even Angela and Demona. They were just really strong. They were stronger than they were in the cartoon, and they really set the bar for me being like, wow, this is really cool. Like, Elisa Maza is almost like the main character of the comic instead of the Gargoyles, which I was absolutely thrilled about.
The second influential comic I wanted to talk about was The Max by Sam Keith. So my Marvel Comics fandom kind of led into Image Comics, which is like where all the best artists at Marvel went and started their own company. I was always obsessed with the art. So in an age of superheroes and big muscles and spandex and, a lot of similarity, it was everybody was doing their version of the X-Men or their version of Spider-Man or their version of Superman. The Max came out and it was very different. The art style is different. I mean, it's comic books for sure, but there's just a lot more artistry to it. Sam Keith would do these wild paintings and crazy panel layouts. Like, it's clear that he was breaking out of what everybody else was doing. Really rendered, detailed stuff. He also did a lot of work on Sandman, which very nearly made my list. So Sam Keith was definitely a big inspiration, and the story itself was very artsy and strange, and you didn't really know where it was going. You know, was this all fantasy? Was this reality? What is it we're reading? It was a very artsy tale through Image Comics in a time of superheroes.
My second book of my most influential comics is a strange one. Well, not strange, but you'd think it's strange for me. Maybe a little bit. Is the Uncanny X-Men number 328, Psylocke versus Sabretooth. Now, this is an interesting one. It's penned by, well, it's the artwork is by Joe Mad. Joe Mad, we'll go with that. He brought anime influences and also that, adult-looking artwork that I was kind of like going from Gargoyles. But this one had that anime look, and that really jived with me because I was getting into anime at the time, and like I was also obsessed with Psylocke for whatever reason. She was pretty, and of course I was like getting into X-Men, and I didn't understand exactly where the stories were going because it's just kind of like I was plopped into a whole entire thing where it was Age of Apocalypse, Psylocke versus Sabretooth, all this stuff. But I had to pick up everything that had Psylocke in it, and my cousin also helped me with that, which was really cool. But there was something very gorgeous, and again, it influenced me in this whole like adult world, and I wanted to do comics, and I wanted to do like maybe Marvel comics one day. And I really enjoyed it, and of course like that mix of like superhero plus anime influences, and Joe's artwork is really really big for me.
So next up is Calvin and Hobbes. That was a major inspiration for me. I would trudge out I have the like definitive collection hardcover of the entire Calvin and Hobbes series, but it weighs like 50 pounds and I just don't really want to lug it out right now. I kind of went from Image Comics, which I was obsessed with right through the end of the 90s, and kind of got into comic strips, and I wanted to be a comic strip artist. I'd say my favorite among them all was Calvin and Hobbes, which had ended like shortly around the time that I got super into comic strips. But I loved the art form. I loved the fact that usually it was one person that was writing and drawing a comic strip every single day, and that just, all these people opening up their newspaper every morning were seeing, how one person views the world. And I thought that was a really cool kind of thing, and I love the idea of doing a comic strip that I created, that I wrote, that I drew, and it was just my musings, just my thoughts of what the world was like and what people are like and what nature's like, and just kind of endlessly musing on something. And a lot of these comic strips would go on for years and years and decades, and you almost just kind of lived in this world. It's very auteur kind of thing, that I was really inspired by. And Calvin and Hobbes in particular, Bill Watterson would use these really great brush strokes and watercolors, and he fought to use Sunday comic strips particularly to make these kind of strange layouts and big artful things and stuff that no other cartoonist was really doing at the time. So I loved the art. I loved the humor. Calvin and Hobbes, it's got to be on everybody's list, right? That's hugely influential.
Number 3 on my list, it's a wonky 3, is the Magic Knight Rayearth manga series, the first 3, which I happen to have still. This is mid-90s. I'm middle school to high school getting into them, so it's really hard to tell what year exactly it was. It's just mid-90s. This is one of my first exposures to the art group Clamp, a 4-woman manga team whose artwork was drop dead gorgeous and detailed to the max, and their story humor was funny and tragic, and all the things that I look to in my media. Tragedy is great, right? But also funny is cool too. But it's just so gorgeous. And like, so I'd get into titles like X and Clover. Those are some of my really great favorites from them art-wise. Clover, I really like the story, even though there's not really a story, and I don't think it even ends appropriately, but it's gorgeous stuff through and through, and I would bring that amount of detail to some of my work, and of course like that manga influence and those tragedy stories would also influence my writing, and definitely, you know, the grandioseness of Clamp, especially Magic Knight Rayearth, would influence my grandioseness today.
In the early 2000s, I got into indie comics. Scott Pilgrim was definitely an influence. Around this time, I was doing Emo Boy. So, you know, it was kind of something that was big while I was getting into indie comics and doing my own indie comics. I loved the idea that Brian Lee O'Malley took all these things that he grew up on and turned it into a brand new story, so he could write about comic books, he could write about video games, he could write about all the things that we grew up loving and inspired by, and just take it all into one big ball of jokes and action and romance and storytelling. And the fact that he just had a ball for, you know, 6 full volumes of Scott Pilgrim and made a really cool movie out of it too. You know, he just kind of created a cool little world to live in for that period of time, and I was always really drawn to that idea. That's kind of what I was trying to do with Emo Boy.
Number 4 on my list comes from about 1999, when I was exposed to indie comics. In fact, the title of I Feel Sick, Story About a Girl by Jonan Vasquez, colored by Ricky Simmons. This would be my big intro to the world of indies, because I had always known like superheroes, manga, and I was tired of all of it. I just like, I don't want to do this. And when I saw I Feel Sick, and then subsequently Giant the Homicidal Maniac and Squee, I learned that I could do something very different. You know, my own style if I wanted to, because there was this whole world of indie comics where there was weird and strange and unique, and you could do anything you wanted to do. You didn't have to have these realistic proportions, or you didn't have to have big eyes and follow that structure. You could do whatever you wanted. And Jonan's I Feel Sick really opened up my eyes, and it was so colorful and so beautiful. And it also was kind of empowering, because it was a story about a female and going through like her day-to-day bad dating life. And I thought that was really interesting. Come to find out, she's a side character in Giant the Homicidal Maniac, which also, those books in particular showed me that I didn't have to do things in color. I could do black and whites. So this was opening up my world considerably, and it would really make an impact on me doing the God Machine and everything that I would do afterwards, because like I could do what I wanted to do. I didn't have to adhere to any particular style or do what anybody else had done before. I could make my own. I could be my own mold. And that's what I did. Thank you, Jonan. Thank you, Ricky. Really good colorist. I see those also, Jonan and Ricky together, but my goodness, Ricky does a great job. Anyways. Number 5 on my list of influential comics is A Tale of Urban Brazil. Details by Fabio Moon and Gabriel Ba. This is 2006. I had the original. This is my second copy, the hardbound. Now, this really influences me in that modern sense of like the 2000s, mid 2000s. something very affirming about Fabio Gabriel's work, that in details it's the slice of life and it's magical, and they merge the two together, and it's quite beautiful. And I've always wanted to do something quite like that, like very quiet stories, very personal stories. I think there's something really great about it, and they definitely influenced me today. They're just their stories are so magical and meaningful, and I want to do that too. I want to create meaning and enrich my worlds like they do. And something about their artwork is very beautiful, especially in this particular book. They go between writing and drawing and flop their positions because they're both storytellers and artists themselves. And it's really fun to see different takes of, like, even the same story. They both did different artwork for it. Like, they told the same story but from a different perspective, and I thought that was really, really intriguing and really good. I highly recommend Details. It's a great read, and of course Day Tripper, also from them, is another fantastic read, if not one of the best comics to come out in a very long time. So those are my 5 most influential comics. I hope you check out the artists and the creators of these books. And be sure to find me on all medias at SpookyChan, and find me on spookychan.com. Bye!
Okay, and my 5th influence is a more recent one, which is Junji Ito, who's a horror manga artist. Yum, yum. So he's kind of famous for drawing these grotesque images, these really kind of nightmarish things, and lots of detail, and these detailed pen nib drawings. It's not your typical manga. Like I love manga, but a lot of it is very similar looking, and this really stands out to me. And I also really like the idea that you think of horror as something that needs like lighting and acting and set pieces and music, and it's just this, you think of films and everything tied together. So the idea that just a piece of paper with some drawings on it can really kind of create such a tension and mood, and really kind of repel you and creep you out, and you can still do these images that really just like get stuck in your head. And especially in the project I'm working on right now, my own horror webcomic, that's been hugely influential, and I've been really kind of obsessively reading Junji Ito's work. So there you go, just a quick video. I just wanted to show you how you can take inspiration from different things, So you have your things you grew up on, you have the things that came up in your later teen years that kind of changed how you viewed things, and you have your, you're always absorbing material, you're always finding new inspirations, stuff's always coming out, there's always content, and I guess as a creator, as an artist, as a writer, there's nothing wrong. In fact, I'd say I would encourage for you to take things, when you read something, think about, why do I like this? What draws me to this? Is there anything I can gain from this that I could put into my own work, Even though there's no original stories left to be told, everybody has their own influences. Maybe everybody's super into Junji Ito, but are they into that and Scott Pilgrim and the Max and Calvin and Hobbes and the New Warriors? So you have all of your influences, things that you're pulling and taking in and putting into your own art. And I think everybody has their influences and their own life and their own choices that come to your unique individual vision. So next time you're looking at something and you go, wow, I really like this, think about why. Think about what's so cool and great about that, and use it when you're making your own comics or whatever it is you are making. All right, I'm Steve Emond. Stay spooky, everybody, and go make comics.
That's all for now. Stay tuned for the late night news, followed by the early morning news. It's the same program. We just run it twice.